In the first 4 videos of Taking Fearless to the Streets, we've been addressing the question of whether ministry to survivors of childhood sexual abuse actually fits the mission of the church and of Christians. And I said, yes, it certainly does in 3 areas. First of all, in the area of salvation, because this ministry can build a bridge for evangelism. But second of all, for sanctification and discipleship, because it enhances discipleship in a survivor's life when they experience help, hope, and healing. And in the last video, we talked about the third area, which is suffering. Ministry to suffering is certainly a part of our calling in the world. And suffering, we said, is the result of sin. Sin always brings suffering, whether it's the sin from the fall, whether it's specific sin we commit, or sin someone commits against us. Suffering is always the result. So let me explain now what I have seen and how I have seen this work itself out in people's lives for almost 50 years. Because oftentimes, survivors can get trapped into a cycle. And I call it the sin-suffering cycle. If you can picture a clock, and there's 12 o'clock, then there's 3 o'clock, then there's 6 o'clock, and there's 9 o'clock. I'll use that in this illustration. At the top is the 12 o'clock position. And you can picture the word sin there, because at 12 o'clock is where sin enters into the person's experience. Now, we're not talking about the person's own sin. We're talking about sin that is committed against that person. So let's imagine a child, 6, 7, 9, or 10 years old, and someone abuses that child. Sexual abuse, physical abuse, or emotional abuse. That's sin against the child. It's not the child's sin, but it is a sin of the abuser. But as we've said, what does sin bring? Sin brings suffering. So that child begins to suffer. And so now the child has gone to the 3 o'clock place on the clock, and picture the word suffering here. The child doesn't understand what is happening or what has happened, but it's so out of the norm of their experience that it scares them, it upsets them, they know something is wrong, and they are hurting, and they are suffering. And it might manifest itself in a young child in the form of withdrawal into themselves, or perhaps they lose interest in things that they once enjoyed. They may lose their appetite or have fits of anger. If they're in school, their performance may suffer. And these are all expressions of the hurt that is going on inside. It's their suffering. And in the best case scenario, there's someone who recognizes the signs of abuse and intervenes to help the child. And that child immediately then gets an off-ramp of this cycle. But we sadly know that most often that doesn't happen. What do we do when we hurt? We look for relief from the pain. If you have a headache, you take a pain reliever. We always look for relief from our suffering. So as this child gets older, maybe into the teen years, they begin to make some choices of their own in an attempt to medicate the inner turmoil and suffering in response to their pain. We all know that very often the choices that we make to medicate pain are actually destructive in and of themselves. So now we've come down to the 6 o'clock position, which again is sin. It was sin at the 12 o'clock, then suffering, and now we're back to sin. But now it isn't someone else's sin against the individual. It is the individual's own sinful choices in response to their suffering. We're making these choices because we're looking for some, typically we say, medication. They might include sexual promiscuity, getting into pornography, drugs, alcohol. The list of medications that we look to is very long, isn't it? And these wrong choices are eventually going to bring their own suffering, because sin brings suffering. So now we've come to the 9 o'clock position on the clock, which is again suffering, like it was over at 3 o'clock. But now we not only have the suffering from the sin that was committed against us at 12 o'clock, but now we've added the suffering at 9 o'clock that we actually committed ourselves at the 6 o'clock position, which leads more to more sinful choices, which leads to more suffering. And this can become a vicious cycle in a person's life that they can get trapped in for their entire life. Sin, suffering, sin, suffering, sin, suffering. And something has to happen to give them an off-ramp from this sin-suffering cycle. And that's what we are talking about doing with the Fearless series. Fearless offers people an off-ramp to stop the crazy, to stop the cycle. It's an opportunity to actually get off the cycle and address the trauma that started the cycle. And as we experience the healing of that trauma, then that suffering begins to be relieved. And then eventually the individual is able to address his or her own sinful choices that brought their own suffering in genuine confession, repentance, and forgiveness. That's the healing process. That's what Fearless is about. It's about healing the wounded heart and giving an off-ramp of the sin-suffering cycle. This ministry really does fit the mission of Christians and of the church. It's hand in hand with our calling to address sin and suffering. It can build a bridge of evangelism, it enhances the discipleship process, and it addresses human suffering. Now that we've established why we should be involved in this ministry, we need to talk about how it's done. So next week, I'm going to begin to discuss how this ministry is most effectively accomplished. God bless you.